Good evening, everyone. My name is Donna Reed, Ward 1 Councillor, and I will be chairing the Planning and Development Committee meeting today. I would like to call this meeting to order for the Planning and Development Committee meeting of Cambridge City Council for Tuesday, February the 11th, 2020. Our first order of business is a safety notice. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers by the nearest exit staircase, which is located through the doorway marked exit, and obey all instructions given by the clerk. If assistance is required, please see the clerk. Once you have evacuated the building, please gather in the Farmers Market parking lot outside of City Hall. Before we begin, I would like to mention that we have arranged for additional seating on the first floor of City Hall at 50 Dixon Street, where a live-in stream of tonight's meeting will be shown. As we have limited seating in council chambers, we ask that if you are not speaking at tonight's meeting, that you consider moving to this room to allow for seating for those who will be speaking in the meeting. It looks like that's not going to be necessary since we have many empty seats. I'm glad to see that. I want to remind everyone that we do have rules of engagement in committee meetings. Please be respectful while others are speaking. And we do not permit clapping, cheering, laughing, heckling, or any form of demonstration. We ask everyone to listen respectfully as you would want to be listened to. A reminder to council members to adhere to the procedural bylaw and limit your questions to 2 at a time. We are not making decisions at this meeting, only recommendations which will go to City Council for final approval on February the 18th, 2020. I would like to introduce the members of Council. To my left, Mayor McGarry, Councillor Mike Devine, Councillor Mike Mann, Councillor Jan Liggett, Councillor Pam Wolf, Councillor Shannon Adshade, and Councillor Nicholas Lemetta. Delegates will be allowed 5 minutes to speak unless they are representing a group in the audience. Then they will be allowed up to 15 minutes to speak. When you have 1 minute left in your allotted time, a bell will go off which indicates this. Please ensure that your remarks relate directly to the agenda item you are speaking to. Otherwise, we may ask that you end your remarks. Once you have finished, committee may ask questions of you to clarify your remarks. The Planning and Development Committee will consider all oral and written comments prior to making a decision on a planning application. Declarations of interest to the committee. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we will move on. We will start by handling the items that are on the consent. Excuse me. There are 6 consent items on the agenda. As a reminder, if you're just commenting on a consent item, there's no need to pull it. You will be given the opportunity to comment prior to committee taking the vote. An item may be pulled if you have questions for staff. Councillor Adshade, you have the motion. Please read out the item numbers.
Thanks, Chair Reid. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Wolf, that all items listed under the heading of consent procedure for Tuesday, February 11th, 2020, Planning and Development Committee agenda be adopted as recommended. And they are item number 1, the Cambridge Cycling and Trails Advisory Committee minutes, November 14th, 2019. Number 2, the Cambridge Environmental Advisory Committee minutes, November 27th, 2019. Item number 3, the Municipal Heritage Advisory Committee minutes, December 19th, 2019. Item number 4, a request to alter a Part 4 designated property, 2529 Main Street. Item number 5, a recommendation report City of Cambridge initiated residential dwelling unit definition zoning bylaw amendment. And finally, OMB, Committee of Adjustment meetings, December 11, 2019.
Thank you. Are there any comments of these items? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That carries. We're going to move our agenda items around this evening and first receive a presentation related to item 7, Stage 2 ION, Light Rail Transit Kitchener to Cambridge update. Following this presentation, we will move to the portion of the agenda that we understand many of you are here for the Consumption and Treatment Services Planning Study. Our presentation this evening will be done by Shannon Noonan, our Manager of Transportation Engineering. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you. Good evening, committee members, staff, and members of the public. Tonight I'll be speaking to you about Staff Report 20-026CD, Stage 2 ION Light Rail Transit Kitchener to Cambridge update. I'll provide a brief update on the project status, engagement that has taken place to date, as well as provide an overview of the report recommendations and next steps. As you are aware, a lot of work has taken place on Stage 2 ION to develop the preferred route, which was endorsed by Regional Council in June of 2019. Since June, work has begun on the preliminary design. The intention of the preliminary design is to address the most significant constraints to ensure that what is proposed will work. Since the start of the design, a fair bit of engagement has taken place. As you may recall, in October 2019, regional staff held councillor briefings to provide an update on the preliminary design, which many of you took part in. As per council direction, landowner meetings were conducted with property owners within the future Preston Station block to discuss potential property impacts. And finally, Public Consultation Centre number 5 was held in November with the purpose of sharing the preliminary design with the public. It is important to note that while the design is more than a concept, it is far from final, and there will be more opportunity for staff, stakeholders, and the public to weigh in. City staff has actively been engaged in this project, and at this time, there are 3 recommendations before you tonight. Recommendation number 1, public washroom facilities. This has been an ongoing request from both city staff and the public. Staff see value in having facilities available at the Bruce Street terminus. Recommendation number 2, that the region complete the final detailed design as soon as possible to allow the city to advance its planning and encourage continued development along the LRT route. And recommendation number 3, that staff continue to work with regional staff. As detailed design progresses, there are some key items that city staff should weigh in on, such as location and design of cycling facilities, increased and enhanced pedestrian crossings, enhanced landscaping, and location of underground services. So in terms of next steps, the region plans to update the preliminary design with any new information gained from stakeholder input, continue to consult with the public, complete the business case for the project, present the preliminary design to Regional Council, commence the transit project assessment process, and submit for provincial and federal funding applications. The city will continue to work with the region on the design and report back to Council as the detailed design moves forward. It is important to note that as detailed design of the project moves forward, more engineering and planning resources will be required, which may have staff and budget implications for the city. City staff will follow up with Council as more information becomes available on these implications. And that concludes the presentation for tonight.
Thank you, Shannon. So are there any questions? Mayor McGarry.
Thank you very much, Shannon, for the presentation. Just a quick question. Is there any guesstimated timeline that the region will be taking to finalize the design details? And really, it's because we'll want to move forward with looking for funding from other levels of government.
Through the chair, with the transit project assessment process, that will expedite some of the timelines. So as part of that, the preliminary design will be approved this spring by Regional Council. Staff will be taking it forward. And then the TPA will start. And then following the TPA, it's my understanding that, detailed design will continue. In terms of the exact timelines, I'm not sure.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, the question I had was asked.
Thank you. I see no further questions, so thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
And we have one registered delegation for this item, so I will now call upon Terry Meisick. Welcome, Mr. Meisick, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Madam Chairperson, members of the Planning and Development Committee, the members of the Stop the LRT Through Preston group have attended the 3 public consultation sessions held last fall. And we appreciate this opportunity to address this committee at such an early opportunity, because I know what is probably going through most of your minds. What kind of Cambridge do we want with the construction of the LRT? What do we want to see in the future? Now, this is a very early time for the LRT, both in Kitchener-Waterloo and the planning process in Cambridge, but we are starting to see some of the early impacts of the LRT in Kitchener-Waterloo. And we can use some of these findings to learn from some of the mistakes that have been made and profit from the many benefits that we have seen in Kitchener-Waterloo. We see our concerns as follows, based on our readings of the region's proposal. The first is that the number of land acquisitions and property impacts have risen exponentially from the first meetings we had. The impact to Cambridge and its neighborhoods is far greater than we were expecting. We need to work with the region to minimize these impacts as much as possible. The essential nature of our city should not be mortgaged or destroyed with the construction of the LRT, rather built up. Number 2, we still have a problem with the potential congestion at the corner of King and Eagle in Preston. We simply cannot understand why we need to bring the train to ground level for a stop when the impact will be daily congestion and the potential for traffic disruptions on a regular basis. We still believe that for the 500 to 700 meters that the LRT will be on the ground at King and Eagle, an elevated solution would be far more preferable. Number 3, we want to ensure that the expected development is in accordance with Council sees as what they want for the Cambridge of the future. We're already seeing some very important things happening in Kitchener, primarily the gentrification that is taking place. We've seen and we've heard that many current residents of the city of Kitchener and Waterloo will be excluded from living in their city or purchasing another house in their city given the rising costs and rising rents. Cambridge is, like it or not, has been a blue-collar city and will probably be a blue-collar city for some time into the future. The cost of ownership of living in Cambridge has always been a factor in raising a family. It's always been that people could buy a house, get a job, buy a house, raise a family here, and do so with enough money left over to have a pretty good life. We must ensure that we do not price Cambridge out of the reach of many who live here. You know, the $1 million condos and high-end rentals will look really good on paper. They'll look good on elevations and pictures, but we must ensure that this does not change the essential complexion of our city. Number 4, traffic on Hespeler Road. There's no question the route proposal will impact the flow of traffic and business access on Hespeler Road to a great extent. It has taken years to get Hespeler Road to the point where traffic moves a little more fluidly than it did a few years ago. We do not want to return to the endless traffic jams on Hespeler Road. So with the proposal before you, there is time to make the Stage 2 ION Cambridge's ION. And this is the decision that you will have to make. And I suggest that we encourage as much citizen participation as possible. Let's make Cambridge's ION a benefit to all the residents of Cambridge. And let's ensure that we move forward in a way that takes into consideration our history and our future. Cambridge's ION should be our ION. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Messick. Now, are there any questions of the committee? Yes, we have some. Councillor Ameta.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. One of my questions, you kind of touched on it, was what would you propose for like some alternatives? And it's good that you mentioned Hespeler Road, because I do represent Hespeler Road, and the businesses are very concerned about losing a lane of traffic in each direction. Even with 6 lanes, it's jammed, right? And I know that we all want to make that shift to transit, but it's going to take a few decades to get there. And so anyways, I want to hear your feedback about maybe some ideas of how you could address Hespeler Road and some of the other parts of the route. Thank you.
Well, Hespeler Road right now is also a King's Highway. And I know that down the road, the construction of the Myers Road bypass and the east side of Cambridge bypass will alleviate a lot of the traffic on Hespeler Road. My suggestion would be to speak to the province, and I know some people will not like this, to get the designation of 24 removed as a King's Highway so that we can better manage the traffic flow along it within the region, and that. I believe also that we will need to do a lot of education with our citizens about left turns, right turns. I mean, it's been a big learning process in Kitchener. I think more than anything, we need to look at the types of development that goes in to ensure that we don't build Hespeler Road to the point where if we do lose 2 lanes of traffic, that we are going to end up in a gridlock situation. So I think a lot of it has to do with what we're doing here now, talking about this at an early stage so we aren't left at the last minute looking for a solution that, just may not be there.
Thank you. Now we'll move to Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, Terry, first I want to thank you and your group for coming together and always identifying problems, but more importantly, coming forward with potential solutions to those problems. And I think when your group does that, the region has heard what you've said, and they've listened to some of those solutions and tried to implement some of those. So I really think it's important and absolutely necessary that you continue to come together and identify those problems as you have today. And I think identifying those problems helps us to look into the future to see what we can do to mitigate that. And as I said, I hope you continue to be involved in developing solutions and continue to meet with the region and have them listen to you and your group, because the potential solutions that you have identified tonight and in the past have worked to our advantage. And you have said it very well that we need a Cambridge solution because Cambridge is very unique. We have, as you said, the 3 lanes in either direction on Hespeler Road, and to reduce that to 2 is going to be significant. And I hope you will continue to meet with the region and continue to advocate on our behalf and work in developing those solutions that will best serve our city.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have no further questions, so I thank you very much for coming out tonight and presenting. Councillor Mann, you have the motion. Would you please read it in its entirety?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do. It's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Shannon Adshade. Stage 2 ION, light rail transit, Kitchener to Cambridge upgrade. That report 20-026, re-stage 2 ION, light rail transit, Kitchener to Cambridge, update be received. And that Council requests that public washroom facilities be included at the Bruce Street terminus. and that council requests that the region completes its final detailed design as soon as possible in order for Cambridge to advance its planning, along with encouraging continued development along the LRT route. And further, that council directs city staff to continue to work with regional staff on the final detailed design.
Thank you. Are there any comments? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. The motion carries. Okay, we will now move to our last item, consumption and treatment services planning study options. I believe Hardy Bromberg would like to begin by introducing this planning study. What, is she going to do it instead of you? Oh, change of plans here.
I'm not Hardy Bromberg. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of Planning and Development Committee. I'd like to introduce the item that's being presented to you tonight on the Consumption and Treatment Services Planning Study. My name's April Suand. I'm the Manager of Policy Planning and the City's Project Manager for the study. First off, I want to be clear that the planning study is not the CTS site selection project. That will come before Council in the next few months. The planning study has been undertaken by our consultant while an interim control bylaw has been in place over the last 2 years. Initially, the interim control bylaw was put in place to prohibit the establishment of what was then known as a supervised injection site. And it was put in place to prevent it from being established in the city's 3 core areas and a 500-meter buffer around them. At that time, 2 years ago, the Cambridge Mayor had asked Regional Council for this consideration as there was real concern that a site would be established in the Galt core against the wishes of City Council. The city's interim control bylaw allowed time for a planning study to be done to determine what rules, if any, should be in the city's official plan and zoning bylaw to regulate this relatively new land use. In the intervening time, the provincial program was changed and supervised injection sites are now only allowed within consumption and treatment services, mandating that wraparound services be available along with the supervised consumption of illegal drugs, in order to prevent overdoses and help people access other needed supports. The CTS planning study has now been completed by Meridian Planning Consultants, and I'll let Nick McDonald, the president of Meridian, take you through the planning study and their recommendation based on their research and analysis. That is reflected in the staff recommendation that's before you tonight. So I'll call Nick to the podium, and if you could fire up his presentation.
Welcome to
Thank you very
this
much.
meeting.
My name is Nick McDonald. I'm a registered professional planner and also the president of Meridian Planning Consultants. I've been a planner for over 30 years, providing advice primarily to municipalities across Ontario and from time to time out west. The City of Cambridge retained my firm in May of 2018 to complete the study that I'll be talking to you about this evening. This slide outlines the presentation that I'll be giving this evening. Firstly, I'll provide an overview of the directions received from Cambridge Council, including a description of the interim control bylaw that is currently in effect. I'll also provide an overview of the Consumption and Treatment Services Planning Study, which is a mouthful, so I'm going to be calling it a CTS study from now on, including a brief description of each section within the report, a description of each of the land use planning options that we developed in the context of doing our work, and lastly, my professional planning opinion with respect to what option should be selected. As April indicated, on March 27th of 2018, Council passed a resolution indicating that the region consult with the City in developing criteria for possible locations before identifying a specific site. And secondly, any site under consideration shall be located outside the 3 core areas. Following this, on April 10th, 2018, Council passed an interim control bylaw that prohibited the establishment of a consumption and treatment services site within the 3 core areas of Galt, Preston, and Hespeler, and the 500-meter buffer area surrounding these areas. On March 26, 2019, Council voted to extend the ICBL by 1 year. This provided the city with the time needed to complete the planning study. This slide identifies the 3 core areas to which the interim control bylaw applies. So the actual core area boundary is as per the official plan and is shown in black, and the 500-meter buffer area around it is shown in red. The purpose of the CTS planning study was to evaluate the applicable land use policies and zoning regulations that relate to CTS sites. A planning study is required as a consequence of the Planning Act. The Planning Act indicates clearly that if a council passes an interim control bylaw, there is also a need to prepare and complete a planning study before it expires to deal with the issue that was the subject of the bylaw. And that's why I'm here tonight, to present that study. The CTS planning study report includes a review of the legislation that currently applies to CTS sites, a review of the study recently completed by Waterloo Region or Regional Public Health and the location of the CTS sites in Ontario. There are 16. I reviewed the provincial policy statement, the Cambridge official plan, and the city zoning bylaw to determine what a CTS site would be in land use terms. I also reviewed the land use considerations that could be used when planning for a CTS site in the future. I reviewed the public input received as a consequence of doing our work. And then, of course, the land use planning options we developed for City Council's consideration, along with our recommendations. In terms of federal requirements, there is a need to obtain an exemption from the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act before a CTS site can be established, and this exemption is granted by the federal government. The federal government administers a process for an exemption to the CDESA that includes the number of things on this slide. Description of the proposed CTS site, including the types of services offered, a description of the local conditions related to drug-related overdoses and deaths in the local area, the policies, procedures, and information on the personnel that will work at the CTS site itself, a robust consultation process to be carried out in the community of the proposed CTS site, and a report documenting the findings and conclusions reached through that process, and lastly, a financial plan to demonstrate how the CTS site will be operated and funded through the course of its operations. Exemptions are typically granted for a 1-year period. However, in some examples we reviewed, the exemption applied for up to 3 years. As Ms. Suwand indicated, the province significantly changed the way these sites were approved in 2018. And in that year, they announced that they were moving forward with a repurposed program for supervised consumption sites, and the new program resulted in a renaming of the sites to consumption and treatment services. Under the new program, CTS sites are now required to provide integrated wraparound services that connect clients who use drugs to primary care, treatment, and other health-related services. An application to the provincial government is required for provincial funding when a CTS site is being applied for. The provincial application is very similar to the federal application program. However, there are 2 differences. Firstly, the provincial application requires a council resolution of support from the local municipality in which the CTS site is proposed. This change made by the province occurred in October of 2018, which was after council passed the interim control bylaw in April of 2018. In addition, the provincial application program requires that specific land use considerations be reviewed as part of the process, with those land use considerations dealing with other land uses such as parks, schools, childcare centers, and so on. Even though land use considerations are identified in the application guide, other land use considerations could also be considered, and we have done so in our work. In 2018, Regional Public Health completed a feasibility study of supervised injection services in the region of Waterloo. The study concluded that supervised consumption services are needed in the region, and their focus has been on finding sites. On April 15, 2019, Kitchener Council supported moving forward with a federal and provincial application for a site in a freestanding building at 150 Duke Street West. On October 15th, that site opened. As part of that process, there was a lot of discussion about a site in Cambridge, and a recommendation on locating a site in Cambridge was not made as part of that process as a consequence of community concerns at the time. There are 16 existing CTS sites in Ontario, and they are identified on this slide. With respect to the physical location of each of these sites, all of them are on or within close proximity to a main street. They're located in a downtown or a core area of the smaller cities. However, within Toronto or Ottawa, which are larger cities, they are in commercial areas, and they all are either on or in close proximity to public transit routes. Most of the CTS sites appear to be in multi-use buildings containing other similar uses. The table on the right also identifies where these CTS sites are: St. Catharines, Hamilton, Kitchener, Guelph, Toronto, Kingston, Ottawa, London, and Thunder Bay. In reviewing the CTS sites, we determined that only one of those sites required a Planning Act approval, and that was in the City of London. It appears all of these sites were permitted and allowed to operate in accordance with the planning rules that were in effect at the time the application was made. Since this is a land use study, we spent some time thinking about how this type of use would be defined in land use terms. And in this regard, we reviewed a number of items. The first was a local planning appeal tribunal decision in the City of London. In that particular decision, it was determined that CTS sites respond to public health and safety concerns and are intended to save lives, and that permitting such a use is consistent with the provincial policy statement. And with that, the LPAT approved that particular rezoning application. In that decision, the CTS site use was also classified as a health facility. So that's how they saw it when writing the decision. Because we're in the City of Cambridge, I certainly reviewed the City of Cambridge official plan and the policies that apply to social facilities, public services, and public service or public uses. And at the bottom of this slide is a policy in your official plan dealing specifically with public uses, which I'll read. Any use by the city, the region, the province, and the Government of Canada. This includes any department, agency, board, or commission of the various levels of government, including utilities for the generation and distribution of electricity. I also reviewed the City of Cambridge zoning bylaw, and it contains a very similar zoning provision that also permits public uses in all zones within the city. I also reviewed where health facilities or clinics are permitted, and they are permitted in most commercial zones and in your M1 zone in your industrial area. So as a consequence, I've determined and concluded that a CTS site would be considered a public use as long as it was operated by an agency of a public authority such as the city, the region of Waterloo, the province of Ontario, or the Government of Canada. The City of Cambridge's policies on public uses and the provisions in the zoning bylaw on public uses are very consistently applied across the province of Ontario. Every official plan and every zoning bylaw contains very similar provisions permitting public uses in their municipalities, and Cambridge is no different in that regard. With respect to determining the need for a CTS site, the federal and provincial applications both require the demonstration of need as part of the application process. And in this regard, need is established by describing local conditions. That includes identifying the number of drug-related overdoses and deaths in the local area. In this regard, Regional Public Health mapped 911 calls of opioid overdoses in the Waterloo feasibility study. These maps are updated in an annual opioid report, and these maps are shown on the right. Between 2016 and 2019, as it relates to Cambridge, A low number of overdose calls were in Hespeler. A medium number of these calls were in Preston, and a high concentration of these calls were in Galt. It is my understanding that there were about 240 calls between January and September of 2019 in Cambridge. With respect to land use considerations, when I relate where the majority of the calls are to the official plan, it is clear that the one designation in which many of these calls are being made from is the community core designation as identified in your official plan. With respect to that designation, there are policies in your official plan that direct social facilities and public services to be located within that designation. In addition, there are specific policies that direct these kinds of uses to the Urban Growth Center, of which Galt is also identified as per the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. In terms of the other land use considerations that should and are typically looked at as part of such a process, we looked at where all of the parks, schools, childcare centers, residential neighborhoods, and areas with pedestrian-oriented retail are in the city, and we prepared a series of maps that are attached to the report. These maps identify 100 and 200 meter proximity areas as identified in the provincial application guide. A drop-in session was held on December 16, 2019 regarding this study. Approximately 50 people attended the 4-hour session. There were two components to the drop-in session. The first was a pre-recorded presentation, and with the second being a number of stations that were manned by city staff who were able then to answer questions about various elements of the study. A feedback form available from December 16th to January 10th, 2020 included a number of questions on land use considerations, and almost 250 responses were submitted. In reviewing those responses, the majority of them continued to express their opposition to establishing a site within the City of Cambridge. In addition, many respondents indicated that it was their belief that these sites are only providing safe injection, a place for safe injection, and do not include the other services that are mandated by the province. As I indicated previously, these are requirements of the province, and they do have to be demonstrated to exist when an application is being made. With all of the above in mind, I developed 6 options for consideration and discussion this evening. Option one involves amending the official plan to permit a CTS site in any land use designation in the city, subject to certain criteria, and require a temporary use zoning bylaw amendment to permit the use with a CTS site application. This is contrasted with the process in the City of London. City of London also requires a rezoning application, but their application would result in a permanent change to the zoning bylaw. And since these facilities are licensed for 1 to 3 years, my thinking was that a temporary use permission should go with a license if that was the approach selected by the city, as opposed to permanently rezoning a property for that type of use, with that permission extending beyond the time a license would potentially apply on the lands. So that's why you see temporary use as opposed to a straight zoning bylaw application. A temporary use bylaw amendment can apply for a period of up to 3 years, and the process would include, at the very least, 1 statutory meeting under the Planning Act. Prior to expiration, City Council could extend a temporary use bylaw for an additional 3-year period and can continue to do so if desired. Every time the bylaw is extended, a statutory public meeting is required, along with a decision of Council. Any Planning Act application can be appealed to LPAT, as this committee well knows, and that also applies to a temporary use bylaw application. If such an application was made, provided of course this option was selected, and Council refused to consider that application, that refusal could be appealed to the local planning appeal tribunal. On the other hand, if an application was made and City Council approved that application, then someone not happy with that decision could also appeal that decision to the local planning appeal tribunal. In addition, if someone made that application, it was deemed to be complete, and no decision was made within 90 days of submitting that application, that individual could also appeal that lack of decision to the local planning appeal tribunal. Notwithstanding the fact that the local planning appeal tribunal would hear the application, no matter their decision, it is my opinion that they would not be able to compel council to pass a resolution indicating support for a site. That is clearly beyond their jurisdiction. This slide provides is an overview of that option. And to be very clear on what this option entails, there are two elements. The blue is the official plan element, and the orange is the zoning bylaw element. So very specifically, if this option were selected, City Council would amend its official plan to permit this site in any land use designation in the city subject to criteria. There are two baskets of criteria on this slide. One criteria deals with need, and these criteria could deal with such issues as close proximity or near where drug consumption is present, where well serviced by transit could be a criteria, close to an area where there are other drug-related services offered, and other criteria could be added to this list if there was interest in this option. The second basket of criteria deals with the land use conflict side of things, and there could be criteria related to distance from and setbacks from a series of uses which I've listed, and they include busy commercial areas, public spaces, parks, childcare centers, key pedestrian corridors, elementary or secondary schools, municipal pools, arenas, and community centers, and residential neighborhoods. The City of London's official plan has similar policies that do essentially the same thing as is set out on this slide. The official plan amendment would also specifically permit the consideration of a CTS site subject to the submission, application, and approval of a temporary use zoning bylaw amendment. And clearly, Council would have the ability, based on whatever application was submitted, to make a decision that it felt was best for the community. The second thing that would have to happen if this option were selected is that the city's zoning bylaw would also have to be amended. And to do that, it would have to be defined as a specific use, much as it is currently defined in your interim control bylaw, and then it would need to be prohibited anywhere in the city. This is required because this use is currently a public use. And in order to prohibit something, you have to identify it, define it, and then prohibit it so that it cannot come in as another use as defined or permitted by your bylaw. By prohibiting this type of use in your zoning bylaw, this would trigger the need for a temporary use bylaw application. So the next three options are variations of option 1, but they apply to different geographies. So option 2 is to permit a CTS site anywhere in the city except community core areas and the surrounding 500-meter buffer area in the official plan, subject to certain criteria, and require a site-specific temporary use zoning bylaw amendment to permit the use with a CTS site application. This option is basically the same as option 1, except the official plan would very specifically prohibit a CTS site within the community core areas and the surrounding 500-meter buffer area. That essentially means that if someone wished to develop a CTS site within the core area, they would have to amend the official plan and zoning bylaw. If they were outside of the core area and outside of the buffer area, they would follow the process set out in option 1, which is simply to apply for a temporary use bylaw amendment. I should note that any option that entails an amendment to the official plan, the official plan amendment itself, as adopted by council, does go to the region for approval. And in the end, the region would be the approval authority of any amendment application or any amendment to your official plan. And the region can do a number of things. They could modify a decision made by a local council. They could refuse the request made by the local council to amend the official plan, or they can approve it. In any of those circumstances, the decision of regional council can also be appealed to the LPAT. And that is something to consider, certainly, as you're making a decision on which option is the most appropriate. Option 3 is essentially the opposite of option 2, in that it would only permit a CTS site in the community core areas and the surrounding 500-meter buffer area, subject to certain criteria, and require a site-specific temporary use bylaw amendment. So essentially, if someone wished to establish a site in the core or buffer, the only approval required would be a temporary use bylaw amendment. Anywhere else in the city, they would have to amend the official plan and amend the zoning bylaw to permit the use. Option 4 is a variation, and this one would involve permitting a CTS site only within the 500-meter buffer area surrounding the community core areas in the official plan, subject to certain criteria again, and require a temporary use bylaw amendment in that specific geography. So the permission in the official plan would only apply within the buffer areas, not the core areas themselves. And within that buffer area, the only approval required under the Planning Act would be a temporary use bylaw amendment. Anywhere else in the city, including the core area, you would be required to amend the official plan and zoning bylaw. Option 5 is to continue with the status quo and recognize that a CTS is a public use. As I mentioned already, it is my opinion as a registered professional planner that your official plan and zoning bylaw already recognize and permit this type of use, provided it is operated by a public agency as a public use within the City of Cambridge. So this option would rely upon the public use provisions in your official plan and zoning bylaw moving forward. This means that there would be no citywide official plan amendment and no citywide zoning bylaw amendment required to implement this option. This option also means that the city would be relying upon the already established federal and provincial processes around the siting of this use. And of course, and as mentioned before, this process involves a decision of council being required to support any application for provincial funding. And this is different than what existed at the time the interim control bylaw was passed, because at that time that requirement was not in place. Option 6 is to prohibit the CTS use citywide. And in order to do that, you would have to amend the official plan to specifically identify this use and then prohibit it. You would also have to do the same thing with the city's zoning bylaw. And you would have to do that because, as I indicated, the use is currently considered to be a public use. So you would have to take that specific action as a council to ensure that it could not be considered as a public use. Again, such an amendment would have to go to the region for approval, and they would have to make a decision that they felt was appropriate. In addition, the zoning bylaw amendment could be appealed by any party who felt that that was not a good idea. Prohibiting a CTS site anywhere in the city, in my opinion, would need to be based on valid land use planning grounds. In my opinion, as you'll see in the next slide, I do not believe those valid land use planning grounds exist. So this particular slide identifies the option and summarizes them. As I indicated, the first 4 options involve amending the official plan and zoning bylaw in some way and identifying or pre-identifying areas of the city where such a use could be located or not located. And in all 4 of those options, amendments to your official plan and zoning bylaw would be required. Option 4 does not result in the need to change the official plan or zoning bylaw. Sorry, option 5. Option 6 also involves an amendment to the city's official plan and zoning bylaw, and that option would result in a prohibition anywhere in the city. So in terms of my analysis and the considerations that I brought to this as a land use planner are on this slide. In my opinion, the need for a CTS site in Cambridge has been established through the Waterloo Region Public Health Feasibility Study. Secondly, the need for a CTS site in society as a whole, or society in general, has been established as a consequence of my reading of the decision the local planning appeal tribunal made in the City of London. And on this basis, it is my recommendation and my planning opinion that option 6, which would result in a prohibition of this use citywide, not be supported. In my opinion, there is a robust consultation process required at the federal and provincial levels as part of the applications for a CTS site, and a council resolution of support is required to support such an application. In my opinion, this allows for the local council to make a decision that matches up with what it believes are the community's expectations. Establishing a Planning Act process involving community consultation and a separate council decision, in my opinion, has the potential of being duplicative and very confusing. This is simply because in both processes, consultation is required, and in both processes, a council decision is also required. The most significant difference between the two processes is that one process is in the complete control of this council, and the other process is not, because it has the potential of being appealed to another body who can make a decision that they feel is appropriate. And that decision may, quite frankly, not be the same decision that you made as a council. So that's something I suggest you consider. So our recommendation is to go with the status quo and continue to consider a CTS use as a public use in accordance with your official plan and zoning bylaw, which means no amendment would be made to your official plan, no amendment would be made to your zoning bylaw. There would be no potential for those amendments to be dealt with by another party, such as the Region of Waterloo or the Local Planning Appeals Tribunal. This option, as I mentioned, relies upon the robust process established by the federal government, and this option avoids going through two processes that essentially result in the same decision being made by this council. And as I mentioned in my fourth point, this option obviously avoids a situation where another body is making a decision that, in my opinion, is more properly the city council decision. I'm happy to take questions. That is my presentation. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very comprehensive, and I know it took some time to do, but I really think it is important for us to really understand the options that are before us. I do have questions. We'll begin with Councillor Etche.
Thanks, Chair Reid, and thanks for the detailed and complex report. My question is, my understanding is that any official plan and zoning bylaw amendment or site-specific approval could be appealed to LPAT, which then can make a decision regarding a potential CTS site. Is that correct? Is that all in the nutshell? Okay.
That's a pretty good nutshell, yes.
Yeah, and even a site-specific one as well, right?
That's
okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I really appreciate the presentation because it was very in-depth and very easy to follow. And but I just want to make sure that I understand it clearly, Nick. And the one thing that you said is that the province and the federal government require a robust consultation process. And in that process, City Council holds the final key as to whether or not an option would be approved. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So in options 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6, all those options will either go to the region or to LPAT.
Potentially, yes.
And if there were an appeal, and if they went to the region or LPAT, we lose control. Council loses control as to any decision-making process because we give that over, so to speak, to the region or to LPAT to make the decision for us.
That's essentially the message I'm giving you tonight.
So option number 5 allows us to retain control of the decision-making process about where, if, or when a CTS were to be established in Cambridge.
That is correct.
So if the City of Cambridge, if this council wants to retain control, we have no option except number 5.
That's correct. I mean, clearly, with the other options, you have the ability to make decisions, but my main point is that decision may actually be made by someone else out of your control.
And if I may, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I'm on a bit of a roll here. If I want to have, I'm not a control freak, but in this case I want to be. I want to have control about what decisions we make for our community. And we've heard all kinds of feedback from our community about what they want or don't want. And if I choose anything other than 5, I give up my right to make the decisions for my city.
That potential certainly exists, yes.
That's all for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And we'll move to Councillor Liggett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When I look at your recommendation under 3, just back one slide, I think. Yes. City resolution of support is required in accordance with provincial requirements for a provincially funded site, but somebody else could fund the site, correct?
That is entirely possible, and when I reviewed the 16 other sites in Ontario, they all are provincially funded. And the provincial requirements clearly require that there be a consultation process. And in my opinion, it would be very difficult for the province to support an application that did not have local support.
But that would be for provincial funding.
That's correct.
So again,
Yeah.
if somebody else like the region decides they want to fund it, that would take that requirement out of there.
If the region is funding it, that means it's a public use.
Okay, so when I read your report, I find consistently, connections to the LPAT hearing in London and also the Supreme Court decision. And when that Supreme Court decision came down, I've read that decision, and I've read the summaries and the analysis following that. And what I don't see in here is where there was criticism of the federal government's lawyers at the time. And let's remember, there's always got to be somebody graduate at the bottom of the class in law school, right? So they failed in their job to show community safety was at risk. That was part of the analysis afterwards by people who had read that Supreme Court hearing. They did not utilize the police department, even though the police department had all of the data as to what was happening in the area. They had that opportunity, they did not take it. And I think when I read that Supreme Court decision, it shows that the courts didn't have a choice because they weren't given any other material. Would you not agree to that?
I wouldn't be able to comment on that particular aspect of it. I reviewed the decision. I did not review all of the back and forth that people have considered since that time. The point of reviewing that decision was to determine what the decision was and how it was implemented, and it clearly provided a path for the federal government to allow for the exemptions going forward to the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act.
Well, yeah, and I think you referred to that on page 71 because it says here that you relied on the City of Toronto's drug strategy summary rather than your own summary of the Supreme Court. So,
I read the Supreme Court decision, and quite frankly, it's not an easy decision to read. And when I found an excellent summary, like the one I did, I thought the summary did a very good job in providing that.
Okay, so then when we go to the LPAT decision in London, they refer as well to community safety, and they also were not given any other information as to, they relied on the same information that everybody's been referring to since 2003, which is the Insight one and the LAC and the Supreme Court decision. I'm pretty sure that, if I remember right, the chair for that refers to it repeatedly, and that's in your report. I'm wondering if you were aware of this new study that just came out on January 13 from the city of Lethbridge. It's one that they commissioned with the University of Lethbridge, where it starts before the consumption site came in, and it clearly shows the damage to a community and the safety problems. So would you not say this is the kind of report that everybody should have had all the way along?
Well, three things. I'll answer your question. Firstly, at the LPAT hearing in London, evidence was provided by a number of professionals I certainly wasn't at that hearing. I have to assume that there was evidence given on a range of topics. There was some opposition to that site, and the role of an LPAT member in that case is to listen to the evidence provided and make a decision that he felt was appropriate. And my job as a planner is to report on the decision. I can't really comment on what wasn't or was not, or what was or was not provided in evidence, because I quite frankly wasn't there. Secondly, with respect to the Lethbridge study, I am aware of its recent issue, and my answer back to that is that's great, but it's not really a consideration for me in making recommendations on an approach for the City of Cambridge. In my opinion, if that is something that is felt to be important, then it is important as part of a site selection process and as part of the decision-making process you undertake when you decide on whether a CTS site should specifically be in the city. My role was not to review specific sites or make recommendations on specific sites. My role was to provide you with options with respect to what to do with your official plan and zoning bylaw.
Okay, and if we had a new government come in federally or provincially, any of these criteria or policies could change. I mean, we just saw that happen at the federal level where they changed it not that long ago. So if we are taking into consideration that we would be able to work through that and be able to stop something based on those, that could change at any given election, correct?
That's always a possibility. However, I can't predict the future, and all I can do is provide advice based on legislation that exists today. And certainly, if in the future that legislation changes or the way these sites are approved changes, then this council has the ability to direct staff and others to review the issue again.
Okay, thank you for your forthright
Thank
answers. I certainly appreciate it. I may have some other questions, but I'm sure other people have questions as well here, Madam Chair.
I was going to remind you
Yes,
of the
yeah.
2 questions.
Oh,
and
I
to
was
go
hoping
through
we'd
the
have
chair,
more
please.
leverage tonight with this such an important topic that,
It is an important topic, but
As
we do
Councillor Mann
like
did
to
as well.
keep to,
Yes.
to our protocols if at all possible. Now we'll move to Councillor Amenta.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I do appreciate the presentation and the hard work that you and your team put into this report. My question that I've got so far is if Council were to make it very clear that they did not want it anywhere in the core, and if the LPAT had a different opinion, would the provincial and federal governments still fund the site, even though it wasn't really a local decision because, Council in that case didn't want it? So that's my question.
Right. So I think I answered that question in my presentation, but I'll do it again because it's not a simple topic. If you have policies in your official plan that prohibit something from happening, or CTS site from developing in the core, and someone makes an application under the Planning Act to establish such a site and you refuse it and it goes to LPAT, my point was that you would be establishing a duplicative process and potentially handing over the approval authority to someone else. But I also made it clear that the LPAT itself cannot compel this council to pass a resolution to support a funding application. So I know that sounds confusing, but that is my planning opinion because it's beyond the jurisdiction of the LPAT to do so. I think my point is more that you would be establishing 2 processes, one which results in lots of time and energy being spent on a process that may result in someone else making a decision, and that decision having an impact on a whole range of things in the city. Whereas the other process involves you as a council solely being the decision maker with respect to a site. I hope that answered your question.
Are you satisfied? Okay. I see no further questions. I want to thank you very much for...
Thank you very much.
Oh, wait a minute. Just when I say that, then they start to light up. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. And Ken, just on that last item that you talked about, if LPAT can't compel council to make a resolution on an option that has been appealed, would the application have gone through, would the application be accepted by the federal and provincial government without that resolution of support?
No, it would not. It would not. No, at the end of the day, even if LPAT said yes, and you said, and you did not pass a resolution in support, that means no site, because the province has indicated very clearly that a local council resolution of support is required. I guess what I'm saying is that why confuse two processes together when you have the ultimate decision to make in one process?
Right.
That's really the simple point.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that clarification.
Thank you.
And now, Councillor Liggett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for a point of reference in your report, I noticed that when I look at your map of the pedestrian portion, when I look at Galt, I see that there is part of that missing. So if that's being utilized for criteria, there are some missing. And also, when you list the parks, you've missed, when I look at the city's list of parks, there's about 100 of them, and you've got, I think, 50 some odd. And in my ward alone, I see Centennial Park, which has a band shell, it has an outdoor hockey rink, right, and you don't list it as a park that needs to be stayed away from. And I also, Central Park is also, in Galt, is also missed, and that's right next to a school. So I just want to bring the attention to that. I think that there's parks in the other wards as well that I've noticed are missed. So just some little things that, you know, if this is going to be used as a reference for the future, that I think it's an excellent report.
Thank you.
But it's those little things that kind of dig at me. So I do appreciate the work that you've done.
Thank you. All I can say is the mapping is preliminary, and certainly it can be improved. And in my view, it really is to demonstrate where these places, where these uses and facilities are, and certainly if it could be upgraded to be 100% accurate, that's obviously supported.
Okay, thanks.
Now I'm looking at my screen because I'm anticipating it to light up. However, it is not. So, thank you very much. Oh, see, I knew it. Councillor Liggett.
I'm hogging this tonight, my apologies. If we were to have a seventh option and we were to say that this specific site here, we would allow a CTS or SCS, whatever it wants to be called or is called today, how would you rate that option? If it does conform to the PPS, it does conform to, it's consistent, it conforms and doesn't conflict with any provincial plan policy, and it's part of a health treatment site. So how do you think that would fare?
I really can't speculate on it. Firstly, because my role is not to provide recommendations on specific sites. All I can tell you is that there are two elements to the provincial application guide that need to be considered. One deals with need and where the need is the greatest in the city, and the second deals with land use considerations. So those are the two lenses that you have to assess any site against, and that's where I'll leave it, because that's what the guide requires you do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, but I'd also like to ask April Suwan to respond to those questions as well.
Right.
Please,
I think if I can help there and remind committee that there is a separate CTS site selection project that will commence once the study is done, and those types of suggestions can be put forward to the CTS site selection committee as well.
So what you're reminding us tonight is that we are not seeking a site.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, April. Now, Mayor McGarry.
Thank you. It just generated a quick question for me, the last comment. So if there was a particular site but that might be chosen, but the rest of the city would then be off limits for a CTS sign, would land use planning considerations accept that kind of proposal, or would a planner not be able to accept that site because there's no criteria to reject the rest of the city for that site?
Again, that's probably more of a question and a discussion for the site selection process itself, rather than asking me that question. And clearly, every site has to be looked at on its own merits. Every site will be unique, and every site, the two lenses I spoke of would have to be applied each time: need, proximity to where that need is, and the land use considerations themselves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, it goes back to site selection committee in future. Thank you.
I almost hesitate to say anything. However, I do not see any lights. So thank you very much, Nick,
thank you
for
very
your
much.
presentation. I know it has been long, but it certainly has been comprehensive, so thank you very much for that. Now we move to our delegations. We do have registered delegations for this item, as well as a few items of correspondence that have been submitted. So I will now call upon Cindy Watson.
So I'm wondering...
Welcome, Ms. Watson.
Thank you. I'm wondering if is there any place to put this in? No?
You need to use the microphone.
Sorry, is there any place to put this in or no? No?
If it hasn't been submitted ahead of time, then no, we cannot use it.
Okay, so I wasn't aware of that. Okay, so I am just going to talk a little bit about your vision, and I did have something, but so anyway, we'll talk about your vision, where it's a place for people to prosper, alive with opportunity. And that means everyone. We know that. It means people who are addicted to drugs. It means people who are living in the city, people who are wanting to prosper, whether it's we have business owners, whether it's people living in the community. And when we look at the mission, working together, committed to our values and serving our community, I couldn't help but notice when I was reading some of your strategic plan, you address safety. And I think that is the number one, the biggest issues that we're facing. How do you balance the safety of keeping people who are addicted to drugs alive, as well as making sure that community members are safe and that they feel comfortable in their own neighborhoods, in their own homes, walking downtown. And so as I started looking through the federal consultation process and the provincial consultation process, it really is robust. There's a lot of opportunity to gather consultation, whether it's through electronic means, surveys, public meetings. But interestingly, and we've talked about it, it really does address in both the provincial and federal about schools and parks and daycares. And we know that all three of those have in common children. And so I ask this council to keep in mind, at the forefront of any decision, keep in mind our children who are attending schools, our pre-kindergarten attending daycare, our little ones who are attending other daycares that aren't connected to the school, and as well as parks. Because ultimately, the safety of every person is your responsibility. And so at this point, I am sympathetic when I look at the recommendation, because if you choose option 5, it looks as though everything is on the table. And those are the rumors out there, that this council is now going to put 150 Main back on the table, looking at places downtown. And yet it's clear that, it's not open and shut. And so, I sympathize with you, because I know that, and I believe that you want to make the best decision for everyone in our city, that you want to represent everyone. But I think it's also important to publicly state that you will give special consideration to that 100 to 200 meter for schools, the daycares, the parks, and as well as the businesses downtown that want to thrive, that want to prosper. And so I understand you're not looking at a site tonight, but you're looking at something that it can be very controversial. And so at this point, we do have a wonderful community. I believe we have a community that does care, and they're looking for balance. They're looking for public statements of, from their representatives that will go on the record and say, yeah, we care about our downtowns, and we care about our schools, we care about our daycares, we care about parks, but we're going to make the best decision for everyone and make sure that everyone is safe.
Thank you. Now we'll move to questions. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, thanks for your presentation, Cindy. You said that you thought that option 5 means everything is back on the table. And my question is, do you understand now, tonight, after the presentation that we have, that no, it's not that everything is back on the table? It's clear that option 5 gives us, the Council of the City of Cambridge, the authority and the responsibility to make the decision about if or where or anything else. That if a CTS does come here, we have got to take what you have said into consideration: parks, schools, daycares, adult centers, all those things, because we ultimately hold that card to make that final decision. And I just hope that that has been clear through the presentation.
Well, I said the rumor has it that everything is on the table, but I did print out the report, and I could see, obviously there was clarification tonight as well. So I think that message is evident, and I believe reassurance from this council would go a long way.
Thank you.
I have no further questioners, so I thank you very much for your presentation. Our next delegate is Adam Cooper. Welcome, Mr. Cooper.
Well, good evening. Madam Chair, councillors, Mayor, good to see you all again. Although these are reading glasses, I really can't see you much at all. I'll get right into this. Basically, I'm kind of wondering why it seems that option 6 is being kind of just dismissed from the options right off the bat. Part of what we need to show here, and part of what is in the study, is the community comments on what they feel about this. I mean, we saw at the end of the study, what was it, about 240-odd comments which were overwhelmingly objecting to this plan as a whole. The city needs to show community approval, and this study is yet again shown clear objection as of all the consultations, town halls, meetings. I'm concerned that if this study that is obviously asking it and therefore put some value to it. If this study and everything we have heard, the objections from the residents regarding their safety, if that doesn't show objection, then I wonder what does. How far, what level are you setting this unreachable level of objection that we just don't seem to be able to reach? It seems that continuing this plan, going ahead to province, it implies community approval, which with all due respect, in my opinion, is a lie. I believe you would be willingly and knowingly lying to the province and the residents about this approval that is just not there. We've also been told that you have no choice in this, but we've been told that many times that you have no choice. It's been blamed on the province, Christine Elliott. I believe that is not true. You have a choice in this. You are required, the council is required to approve this, which is why I'm not going to go on about all the lack of safety, and you've heard me talk about that before. I'm pleading to you councillors, and from a position of not of ignorance. I've been a multiple victim of addict crime, and I'm also not saying this from ignorance or hatred of addicts. I've had a family member die of an overdose. I've never actually told anybody that. So I'm pleading to you councillors, please stand up for your residents. Go back to the time when you were being elected, when you were campaigning for this position, and I'm sure you promised to represent the interests of your ward residents, promised to look after them. And I'm asking you to stand up for them, the people you represent. You don't represent the region, you represent the residents of this city. And I'm worried that possibly you're being bullied into decisions that maybe you don't want. So I'm asking you to please stand up for your residents and tell them, yes, I am your voice, as you promised when you first got elected, because that is who you are representing when you sit here. Each one of you look at is representing tens of thousands of people, and you promised to represent them. And I'm sorry, with all due respect to all of you, in all this process that we've all been involved in for a couple of years, I'm not seeing that. I'm just not seeing that, and I don't think you realize how much support you would get if you did stand up for your residents. I would love to be able to reach out to everybody that I have access to and say, look, this councillor stood up for you. They heard your voice. That's what I would love to say to them. I'd love to be proud to receive that praise and do what's right, not what you're being pushed into. Because I can't, and I hope you don't take insult in this, but I feel doing anything other than that is just a complete failure of the job for which you were elected to do and which you promised to do for your residents. I ask you to show some political will. There's many times you could stand up for your residents for various things that come around this horseshoe. This one represents everything they stand for: their homes, their businesses, their safety. And this is not about just doing nothing. You know that we and the people I work with, we want treatment. We want other plans. We don't want this to just stop and for people to die. We just want something that works for everybody. And I'm concerned that we're just railroading a plan here that doesn't help anybody. So I'm pleading to you, councillors, please stand up for what you promised to do. What is your duty? Stand up for your residents.
Thank you. Now we will look for questions. Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Thank you.
Our next delegate is Keith Rivers. Welcome, Mr. Rivers.
Thank you. My name is Keith Rivers, and I'm here representing the Citizens for Cambridge as chair of the Addictions and Mental Health group. And the Citizens for Cambridge is a volunteer-based organization dedicated to harnessing the passion, ingenuity, and commitment of Cambridge citizens to support the development of a better community for all. Tonight, I'm going to highlight 5 areas of the study relative to what experts say, what community opponents say, what experience shows, our community needs, and what shall we do? Try to answer the question, what shall we do? As shown in the study, the experts say that the CTS is a strictly regulated health service. That came from the Supreme Court of Canada. It also says that it's needed in Cambridge, according to the Waterloo Region Public Health Study. Also, it's a benefit to community health and safety, as ruled by the London Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. So, what do community opponents say? Community opponents say that the impact nearby a CTS outweighs the benefits. Some community opponents do not want a CTS at all. They feel that there are no benefits. But one thing opponents do say that I think rings true to all of us is that treatment should be a top priority. So what does experience show City Council? Well, we all know from planning and development processes that it's very important to heed and mitigate community concerns with credible actions. And I think we just heard a very emotional appeal for exactly that, to listen to citizens, to make this a safe community for everyone. So that's something that's got to be a high priority when you get involved further in this planning environment. I also note that decisions seldom satisfy everyone. And I've personally been on both sides of that relative to planning issues in the community. Also, I want to say that community fears infrequently are completely realized. And I just give you a few examples. For instance, there were the roundabouts on Franklin Boulevard that everyone seemed to be very alarmed about and excited about and how it wouldn't work and everything else. Lots of opposition. But now I think we see a different picture now that they're in place and now that they're operating. Certainly not without some issues, but frankly for the good of everyone traveling those boulevards. Another example is nightlight drop-in on Main Street. There were a lot of concerns about that, about loitering in the city core, but it seems to me now to be really kind of a non-issue and seems to be doing quite well. Rapid Action Addiction Clinic on Water Street was another area where there were big concerns. And guess what? That seems to be quite fine now. Those problems didn't seem to materialize. The Guelph CTS has been operating for 2 years and experiences wide community support. The Kitchener CTS monitoring shows improvement within a 1 kilometer boundary. And these are comments that came from the Chief of Police at a recent public meeting held here in the city. He says that global evidence says more research is needed, absolutely. There has been a decrease in police services required surrounding CTS globally. There is an ongoing case study in Kitchener, pre and post opening of the CTS being done by police. It involves 1 square kilometer around the CTS. The pre-study concerns included people overdosing in the city, in public, City Hall, Duke Street, lots of needles, etc. The post-study is revealed to date, and it's only a short period of time, but it has revealed to date there are only 8 police calls since opening, 3 medical, 1 unwanted person, 1 property damage, 1 theft. In his opinion, it's not a magic wand for the issue, but police see improvements related to their responsibility and community safety. Guelph and Kitchener both report success in connecting drug users to available services. There have been lots of referrals. So our community needs, what does our community need? Our community needs trauma relief. Today we've got unsafe injection, escalating EMS calls, probably 300 this past year, 240 in the first 9 months, and preventable deaths. The real irony is, folks, that in our community, injection is now occurring in all the places where citizens have indicated they don't want a CTS. In the parks, near schools. It's happening now. We know that from all the needle litter data. So I think it's important also to recognize that a lot of the institutions in this town have been places where people tend to inject because they feel that there is an element of safety, that folks there are trained in the use of naloxone, and therefore they will intervene if there's a problem. So we have a series of unsafe injection sites in this community now. What the community needs is proof that the city takes action to solve its social ills. And also, we need pathways to treatment for drug users. That's something that everybody wants. So, what should we do? Well, our group recommends that we should accept the planning study recommendation, move quickly to establish a CTS as a health facility that connects drug users to treatment. It's something that's not happening now. It improves community health and safety. And I want to emphasize that this be done with a robust plan to mitigate problems and to protect our citizens and our community. As well, we need to carry on with this and pursue other more effective and important well-being tools like detox and rehab beds, mental health and addiction support, affordable and supportive housing, assisted living facilities. There's a lot we can do, and I think we should try and do what needs to be done to make this a better place in which everyone can live and feel safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rivers. Questions? Yes, we have some. Councillor Liggett.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Good evening, Keith. When you say that people are going to be connected to rehab and detox, if we don't have those rehab beds, because people are also supposed to go outside of their community for rehab, if we don't have those rehab beds and we don't have the detox, how are they going to be connected?
Well, the rehab, for instance, is much broader than simply detox. I understand what you're saying about that.
No, rehab beds, not detox.
Right. Well, those are the issues that I said we need to follow on and work on and advocate for in the community. I don't disagree with you on that.
Okay, I'm just questioning it because you said that a consumption treatment site would allow them to be connected to rehab, but they're not available.
Well,
so.
Rehab is a very broad subject. There are 14 agencies in this town that provide 22 services for addiction treatment already in Cambridge. And so it would be connection to those services as well as connection to out-of-town services.
Okay, but not rehab is my point.
No, those are rehab services that I just referenced.
We don't have rehab beds, though.
We do. We have rehab. There are rehab beds in Waterloo. There's a women's addiction treatment facility, a men's addiction treatment facility, and there's one coming to Cambridge on Concession Street.
But we don't
Councillor
have.
Liggett, I think
sorry,
this
I don't
is
mean to
a one-way
debate. I'll go on to
conversation here that perhaps you need to pursue with
I'll go on
Mr.
to another
Rivers
one.
at another time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. Another comment you made was that people's fears have not been realized. I'm wondering if you have read this study, and have you read this? It just came out, so you may not.
I know. I was made aware of it 2 days ago. I haven't had time to read it.
Okay. I would suggest you read it because it states that their fears have been realized and it's actually accelerated, and it starts at a baseline data before there was one. So, yeah, that would be great. I think everybody should read it and we should all be on the same page, hopefully. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I see no further questions, so I thank you, Mr. Rivers, for your presentation. Our next delegate is Brian Kennedy from the Downtown Cambridge Business Improvement Association. Welcome, Mr. Kennedy.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the Planning and Development Council. Tonight I'm here actually before you, not only as the Executive Director for Downtown Cambridge BIA, but I will be speaking on behalf of the Hespeler Village BIA and the Preston Town Center BIA, as we've all collectively come to a decision and a stance on this matter. As business improvement area associations, our city's downtown core areas are vital, and we are here to do our best to beautify and promote these areas as a place for business, growth, and prosperity. It's with this in mind that the three BIAs stand together with one voice to support a permanent bylaw prohibiting the location of a CTS site within the three core areas and all lands 500 meters surrounding the core areas as outlined in option 2 of the report before you tonight. Specifically in historic Galt, downtown Cambridge, the BIA, on behalf of our membership, have taken an active role against the imminent threat of a CTS site in our core area ever since 150 Main Street was first identified as a possible location. Our stakeholders, some of which are here tonight to speak on their own, exemplified the real cause for concern and the plague that this has had on our downtown business owners, property owners, and we believe that this poses a real threat to the potential future investment in our core areas. Let me be clear, it is our stance that none of the downtown core areas can support a CTS site. Cambridge is growing and our core areas are in the middle of revitalization and are transforming before our eyes. But we recognize that we still have a long way to go. We find ourselves at a critical point in this journey where a CTS site, or even more prevalent, the threat of a CTS site, could very well be destructive to the business community and result in businesses closing. Our core areas will be left vulnerable to a widespread fear through the rumors of potential sites as they are evaluated and the stigma that comes with the potential CTS site. We have seen this in Galt. Through the indication of 150 Main Street as a potential site, there has been a perceived need for the site in Galt, and it has continued to hurt the businesses ever since this was identified. As a BIA, and my role as executive director, I can attest that we are not equipped to defend and come back from this should we not safeguard our core areas from the threat of a CTS site. We need security, our members need their investments in our core areas to be protected, and the community needs to feel safe in our downtown core areas. It's for these reasons that a bylaw to protect the core areas is desired by the 3 BIAs and so very needed. Public perception and the potential imminent threat that these will become realities as of March the 26th when the interim bylaw is lifted should be, is why the recommendation by Meridian for option 5, if passed, will be a concern. Because as soon as number 5 is put into effect, essentially we have not safeguarded the core areas from potentially having a site. I recognize that in the report that all other options leave the opportunity for appeals and a tribunal, but to not safeguard our core areas while we have the opportunity to, will ultimately have a negative effect as the perception of and the threat is. Oh, what's that? Sorry, am I ringing?
You have one more minute.
On behalf of the BIA? I would think. Sorry, unlimited 5 minutes? Sorry.
You didn't ask at the beginning for additional time. Did you want additional time?
Yes, please.
Do you have 3 people in the audience from the BIA?
Oh, yeah. Everyone raise their hand.
Yes, you do. Okay, fine. We'll extend it to 10 minutes.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, now I lost my part. Okay. Okay, option 5 as recommended will leave potential site locations wide open, specifically but not exclusively should an application not require provincial funding, opting out of council's approval. So I am of the understanding that should an application come in that doesn't require provincial approval, that it actually isn't necessary to get council's approval to move forward if it's just federal funding. And that can be clarified at the end of my delegation. And again, I cannot stress enough that option 5, if passed, it will have a real threat. It will threaten our downtown core areas because at the end of the day, it perpetuates fear which is as destructive or more destructive than the actual effects of a CTS site will have on our downtown. We've seen this with 150 Main. I mean, just the threat of it alone will have an impact. And to not safeguard the downtowns for future businesses that want to open, for future development, it will have as big of an effect, if not more of an effect, than if we were to actually have one of these CTS sites. I recognize that this is not an easy decision, and the community at large also needs to be considered and protected outside the core areas. But with that said, I think this needs to be thought through carefully, and a decision should not be rushed. Lastly, I just want to say on behalf of the 3 BIAs and the Board of Managements that we will continue to work to advocate against a CTS site in our core areas, regardless of the decision made tonight. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. You ended well within your timeline.
Oh, okay.
We do have some questions. Mayor McGarry.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And I just wanted to point out, before my question, Brian, that council decisions have consistently shown that council takes the BIA's concerns seriously. If you look back to the decisions that council has made, starting before my time on council, the interim control bylaw was brought in to protect all 3 cores and 500 meters. Then when I was on council, we made the decision last year in order to extend the interim control bylaw, protecting the downtown cores and the 500 meters from a CTS site consistently. Further, last summer, we passed the motion when we were looking to a site selection committee uptake that they would look for a site that was outside the downtown cores and that buffer area. I can tell you that there's nothing more pressing on our minds right now than this decision. And I wanted to point out to all of you here and that are listening at home that council has consistently made decisions to protect our fragile downtown cores and that 500 meter. So moving ahead, my question is, having heard the presentation from the consultant, the question becomes then, do you want council, who has consistently shown that they care about the concerns of downtown cores, to make a final decision on a site selection? Or do we hand that decision-making potentially to the region or to LPAT? So that's my question.
Two parts to that. One would be, I guess I'm looking for the clarification on should provincial funding not be a requirement if it's still in council's hands, which I believe Councillor Leggett brought up earlier, but I don't think, did you? Yeah, so that is correct, that it isn't in your hands should there not be provincial funding as a component. So there is a really simple example of how this could completely escape your control should that be the case, and now all of a sudden you haven't safeguarded any of the city from potentially having one. And we know what the imminent threat is. We know what public health has identified as the areas where this is most needed. So here, standing here before you today on behalf of the BIAs, we want that additional measure taken in. And not to mention, it wouldn't escape your hands, because I don't see how the funding would get approved, because like it was also addressed, should this go above you guys to the LPAT, regardless of what they say, if you guys don't approve it, then the funding's not there, and so I don't see it happening. So I actually don't think you're going to lose the control you think, and the BIAs, of course, will be there as part of any evaluation when the time comes to support that case.
I'm questioning whether you really answered it, but I will leave it up to Mayor McGarry if she wants to further.
Thank you. If I may have a follow-up.
Please.
Thank you.
Need you.
Given the information that we were given tonight, my concern is that if council doesn't have full control of the decision, that there may be another body that makes a decision about where a potential site goes. The only option that I see is that council retains control of this decision of a site selection committee process, simply because we've been shown that decisions have been made in other jurisdictions by other bodies rather than council. So I think that council has been extremely consistent in ensuring that we hear the concerns and we have made the decisions according to protecting our core. That's not likely to change. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We have further questions. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I can postpone my question. It's for staff or for Mr. McDonald in relation to the presentation.
Would you like an answer to that now, or would you like to postpone it to when we start discussing the issue?
Maybe now would be better then. And my question is that council has always moved, as Mayor McGarry has said, to protect the core areas, and that's why the interim control bylaw was put in place. If privately funded, would an organization still need or require council approval for that site?
Mr. McDonald?
I guess the simple answer is, based on my research, I would be very hard pressed to see a circumstance where someone didn't need provincial funding to operate a site. That's my number one finding. Every other site in Ontario has provincial funding. I can't see a circumstance where that would not be part of that process. In addition, while there is not a requirement for a council resolution as part of the federal process does require consultation. And I think council can speak through resolution through that process and speak very loudly to the federal government when they are considering an application in that extraordinary circumstance where provincial funding was not required.
So, if I may, Madam Chair.
Please go ahead.
That consultation would have to take place, and that's where council would have the opportunity to endorse or not.
That's correct. The only difference between the federal and provincial processes is that there is not a requirement for a council resolution as part of the federal process. That's the only difference.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have further questions here. Councillor Liggett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a question based on to Mr. McDonald again, based on what he had just stated up here. He had stated that he could not foresee anybody funding that. But my question here to Mr. McDonald is, here we have a region who funds, let's say, the bridges and multiple other things. Does he not think that there would be a possibility that the region itself would fund something and bypass that provincial funding? That's a possibility, is it not?
I can't really speak to that.
You need to come to the microphone, please.
Sorry. I haven't reviewed as part of my process how the region funds various entities and how that actually works. All I know is that if provincial funding is required specifically to operate this use, along with an application for an exemption to federal legislation, that's when the council resolution is required.
Thanks.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Kennedy? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy, for your presentation. Our next delegate is Joanne Malone. Welcome, Ms. Malone.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council, and staff. I was sitting here trying to decide whether I should read what I wrote earlier, but I think I will, but mainly to say that why I might have changed my mind is it seems unclear who has control. The people, council, LPAT, I'm not sure. But in light of that, I'm going to read what I wrote. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on the subject of the planning study. I have read the study and I ask for consideration. Consideration for all the meetings, public consultations, letters, petitions, and community involvement for around 3 years now that have sent City Hall and the region a message. The downtown cores cannot support a consumption and treatment site. The public consultations held last year when 150 Main was the target had a unanimous consensus. The citizens who live and work here would not support a safe injection site. I'm not here to talk about whether or not a safe injection site works or not, to say after all this time that an injection site can go anywhere in Cambridge with respect to federal guidelines without considering all that has gone into the 2 years of an interim control bylaw does not feel respectful to the citizens who have engaged in this issue. You ask all the time, as politicians and municipal employees, for our feedback, our letters, our involvement in the community. You say you want engaged citizens who care about the community and you want to hear from those citizens. You've heard us. Our group has sent all of Council and the Mayor the most comprehensive evidence-based study by the University of Lethbridge, Alberta, which Jan has referred to, that outlines exactly what happens to a community before and after an injection site opens. It is clear it can devastate a community. No two cities are alike, and we are quite unique in that we have 3 downtown cores. Nowhere in Canada will you find a city centre for a population of roughly 60,000 like Galt, with a shelter that houses up to 110 people, a food bank, a methadone clinic, and many more social services, let alone a safe injection site. That is why we are referred to as the hotspot. We are just not robust enough to handle any more. In fact, we need help handling what we have. I ask out of respect for the community who have spoken many times, in many ways over the last 3 years, to establish a permanent bylaw with the same criteria as the interim control bylaw, no CTS in any of the downtown cores with a buffer zone of 500 meters. In other words, option 2. I would also like to note that the planning study indicates that the public input is overwhelmingly opposed to CTS being established anywhere in the city. That's a quote. It goes on to say, quote, many of the responses seem to have the impression that a CTS site only provides a safe injection site without the required wraparound service, i.e. mental health supports, addiction treatment, that the current Ontario model requires on-site or to have direct pathways to. I believe that's for 2 reasons. One, it is common and widespread knowledge that access to addictions treatment is a very long wait list in Ontario, to the point of inaccessible for many. I learned in a meeting last week at Cambridge Memorial Hospital that there is not one single addictions doctor in the entire region of Kitchener-Waterloo. That is irresponsible of our health system. Secondly, I wanted to be very sure of what I believe to be true, so I went to the CTS in Kitchener on Sunday past. I wanted to make sure I had first-hand knowledge of what is actually happening. We were not allowed upstairs out of respect for the clients. A staff member came down and I asked her, if someone came to get high but asked for help, either before injecting or after, what would be done? And she said, well, nothing. We only help people inject. I asked her again, I understand you have wraparound services to help addicts who may want to get clean. She said, not really. I pushed a little more and she said, well, we have pamphlets, which I have here. I have an NA pamphlet, a counseling pamphlet with a list of reasons to seek help, and not one of them was addiction. A small white piece of paper, and it's here, with the phone number for Grand River Hospital. And the most disturbing is a full-color pamphlet adapted from Vancouver Coastal Health with a step-by-step pictorial on how to prepare yourself and shoot up 3 different drugs, heroin, cocaine, and crack. I was appalled. It's chilling to think that this pamphlet may have been designed for first-time users. This is not wraparound service, this is an injection site. As the staffer said, this is not what the public is being told. There is no treatment, just consumption. I know the optics are not good with a name like an injection site, but the public should know exactly what it is. We are asking you for respect, consideration, and a compromise, not in the downtown cores, and stop making Galt the target. We have had enough. There has been a cloud of doom over Galt for far too long with this impending or possible CTS in the core.
Ms. Miller,
we need
could you
to move
wrap
on
up,
and
please?
recover.
You've reached your 5
Last
minutes.
sentence. Please listen to the people who have responded as you have requested.
Thank you very much. We do have a question here. Mayor McGarry.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and really thank you for your presentation, Joanne. I just did want to point out that the site in Kitchener is an interim site.
Correct.
And that the provincial government is has been starting to flow the money in order to actually build a consumption and treatment site. The Region of Waterloo, through the direction from Kitchener City Council, asked for an interim site at the place where there's going to be a permanent site. So at the moment, you wouldn't find any links right now to some of the treatment sites because they're not provided until they have the site built. I believe that the timeline is within this next year. So the only consumption and treatment site operating in our area at the moment is in the Guelph site, but the Kitchener site is only providing interim services, and that's just the consumption site for now.
But it has been said differently, though. right, in the media, that it is a wraparound service as well. And it's called an interim consumption treatment site.
Mayor McGrady, go ahead.
I asked the very question this morning at Regional Committee, and I was told that at the moment they can only provide consumption services and that the provincial government is getting its money together in order to continue to build out the entire consumption treatment services. They're only providing consumption services at the moment. Thank you.
I have no further questions, so I thank you very much, Ms. Malone.
Thank you.
Our next delegate is Terry Polyak.
Prior to approaching the mic to start the clock, may I respectfully ask to borrow a little bit of Brian's time, just because I was a late fly-in last night, and technically I'm part of a group because I have tenants that are part of the BIA, and my son is joining the BIA, and I'm working on a very full bladder right now, so I only have 6.5 minutes.
So you're allowed the 5 minutes, but I will put it the question to council if they would allow you your 6.5 minutes. Does council agree? It looks like they do, so please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. So I'm going to try to talk fast. I'm not here tonight to debate whether a consumption and treatment site is or what it should be, whether there is a need for one or whether there isn't, or if I personally support one or if I don't. I'm not here to talk about the impact one would have on properties, businesses, employees, tenants, residents, future residents in our downtown core should one be located within or nearby. Because I know that you know, everyone here knows. Not one person here, I don't think, can say that there would not be detrimental consequences to our downtown. Simply put, one located within or near the core would be a very bad, irreversible mistake. And because you've heard all of this before many, many times, I'm going to sidestep the issue and talk a little bit about something a little bit more relevant and some things that you may not know. So it's not exactly a secret that I'm kind of heavily invested in the Galt core. And when I say that, I know what many people may think, and I totally get that. Some of you probably think that I have judgment issues, or too much time in my hands, or a bad financial planner, which may be the case. But I can tell you, if you're thinking it's all about the financial gain, you're wrong. Rather, it's the passion I have for bringing old buildings back to life and the passion for the downtown core itself. The blinders to what might be less risky and perhaps smarter investment opportunities. And if you need proof, you can ask my wife about that. But 3 years ago, I purchased 60 Main, renovated it, and moved my company Milestone here from Preston. So who is Milestone? We are a 35-person full-service marketing agency with Tier 1 clients across Canada and the U.S. and even the world, Scotland, UK, Atlanta, Wisconsin, Minnesota, California, Florida, and New Hampshire. I guess Joe Biden isn't doing too well in New Hampshire tonight, but you may have heard some of our clients. Johnsonville Sausages, 3M, Scotch Brand, Post-it Notes, Graco, Rubbermaid, Coleman, Highliner, Maple Leaf Foods, Jordan Cereals, Hudson's Bay, Walker Shortbread, DuPont Pioneer, and Melita Coffee. And more clients, even more local, Christie Digital, Unitron, Descartes, Accelerator Center, and SAP, that little software company from Germany. But many of them often eat, drink, and shop downtown Galt. All of them see Galt, and they report back and spread the word, whether it's good or whether it's bad. We are actually the official meeting grounds for the 3M, company 3M North America head offices from Minnesota and London, right here in Galt. And this is also noteworthy. Senior management from Dare Foods, which is a new client for us up the street, said they hadn't seen and ventured this way to Galt in more than a decade and are now here for regular meetings and are loving it. But this is not a pitch for my agency whatsoever. I'm just trying to add a little context. The importance of this, and think about it, there are people here that are now coming to downtown Galt, most for the first time, not just clients, but vendors who service as well. Google, the Weather Network, Amazon, CityLine, Breakfast Television, and senior leadership from Rogers Media all have come through our door. In October 2014, Pure Balance opened up in downtown Galt a 600 square foot space with one employee servicing 25 clients per week. October 29, they expanded and opened in their new location at 60 Main in 2,600 square feet with 16 employees seeing 200 clients per week. And this is a real boost to the downtown image. And what could be cooler than an out-of-town company coming here to set up their new business? And I'm negotiating right now a lease for a new tenant coming from Milton to service the wedding and event industry, which, as you know, is becoming a thing down here in Galt, thanks to the Mill, Tapestry Hall, Evo, Langdon Hall, and among other growing support services. This leaves one space left at the corner of Ainsley and Main, at 60 Main. We have talked to 3 well-known restaurant entities, and there's genuine interest. When it happens, that adds 20 more employees downtown. However, their trepidation at this point is due to the outcome of why we are here tonight. I've also have a stake in 11 Ainsley, the old bus station. That building sat dormant for a long time and it was in disrepair. It is now the home of the very successful Art of Home. Within the first year, they were running at a 90% over sales from their former location. They now employ 15 people and continue to grow. Upstairs, nicely renovated apartments, 6 of them, and it's something that we all know that this city really desperately needs. And in case you missed it, I just rattled off 3 businesses with a total of 65 actual employed people and 6 tenants within less than a 30-second walk. 3 years ago, that did not exist. Next to 60 Main, the former liquidation store, which we purchased last summer. You may have noticed some prelim work that we've done, started last fall, and that will continue when the weather changes. It was covered for over 50 years with the same ugly brown siding as 60 Main when it was all part of the Wright House. When finished, it will look amazing with its 1930s Art Deco design. Currently, we are gutting the interior and preparing layouts for potential clients, and another one's on the line, as a matter of fact, today, which could add another 15 employees downtown. And because I apparently don't have enough to do, tonight I can formally announce that I have purchased 15 Main, the 4-story gem, in the granite block right beside Cafe 13. I don't want to call it Cafe, but it is just 13. It has been vacant and decaying for 12 years. The roof has failed and it's bleeding water through each of the floors. It's an understatement to say this building is financially challenged and will take a lot of work to pull it together. But when finished, it will have 12 one-bedroom apartments on 3 floors, and the main floor will finally have 3 great retail units on 2 frontages. This represents the potential of an additional 30 people living and working in the core. If you're keeping score, the running count is now at 141 people new to the downtown core. Investment and growth works, and it matters. Look at the newer independent shops and businesses that entrepreneurs are putting their money and borrowed money into, the Whitty & Co., Atlas, Sugar Daddies, Retrade, not to forget the businesses that have been persevering like Brown's, Galt Juice, Monogram, Reed's, Cornerstone, Clippers, Coffee Shelter, Coffee Culture, No Water, Moda Yoga, Hungry Ninja, Play with Clay, and I can't even list them all. Look at the remainder of Main Street and the core in general. You know what you see, you know what you hear, and you know what the reputation is. At best, a closely situated CTS would stop new entrepreneurs who are the future of the core. In reality, it would very likely exasperate the situation, reversing the course that many of us are working so hard to make happen. Vacant buildings and storefronts will stay that way, and structurally compromised buildings may hit the point of no return. And really, we don't need another Preston Springs, do we? So I guess I kind of lied. I did talk about the impact, but I guess how could I not? Right now, things are happening. A corner has been turned, and this is despite the headwinds that we already face. You have a responsibility, or we all do, to not take that away from us or yourselves. This is the time it should be happening, especially on the backs of upcoming and much talked about anchor developments in and surrounding the core, like the Mill development, like Gaslight, and other residential developments that are seemingly more than just rumors these days. Remember, bylaws aren't put in place as some sort of a chess match. There are solid economic, social, and environmental reasons, and a good bit of common sense. Should there be one, making the right choice for a CTS location is paramount, and outside the core. Safe to say, you know this too. Like so many others here tonight, I strongly support a permanent bylaw in place protecting the core with the 500-yard buffer. I thank you for letting me speak very quickly tonight. Sorry about that.
No, and we did let you go even past your 6.5 minutes.
I knew I would. I got you, didn't I?
Okay, any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next delegate is Angela Raposo. Welcome, Ms. Raposo.
Through you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Mayor Meary, Council, and members of the public. As was just confirmed, we can see that it is very clear that Council does not have the ultimate control over site selection if a private funder acquires federal exemption. My name is Angela Raposo, by the way. Thank you. I'm a resident of Cambridge. Tonight I would like to speak in regards to the Consumption Treatment Services Planning Study options, specifically options 2 and 6. Option 2 is to prohibit a CTS in the city's cores, including the 500-meter buffer. This option was not recommended because it would exclude the area of greatest need in Cambridge. However, if one is to compare the latest heat map of drug overdoses in the Galt core, including the 500 meters, we can find areas outside of the 500 meters that would still be in an area of need and meet application requirements. For example, the Delta is an area of need, is outside of the buffer zone, is not within 200 meters of a park or school, and is on a major transit line. Choosing option 2 at a location in that area would effectively protect the Galt core, yet still addressing the area of need and meeting application requirements. Option 6, which is to prohibit a CTS site anywhere in Cambridge. This option was not recommended for a few reasons, one of which it would go against the Supreme Court ruling that prohibiting a CTS site would violate the constitutional rights of the user. However, Meridian Group in this report does not analyze the actual SCC decision, but merely a summary that was prepared by the City of Toronto's drug strategy. Meridian Group neglected to include that the Supreme Court ruling number 33556 also stated that on future applications, the minister must exercise discretion within the constraints imposed by the law and the Charter, aiming to strike the appropriate balance between achieving public health and public safety. Whereas here, a supervised injection site will decrease the risk of death and disease, and that there is little or no evidence that it will have a negative impact on public safety. The Supreme Court ruling is almost 10 years old, and in that time, more sites across Canada have been established. Many sites are seeing the negative impact they are having on public safety. The most up-to-date and unbiased study commissioned by the City of Lethbridge by Dr. M. Pye. Crime and public disorder seeing a marked increase since the consumption site opened. Businesses cannot keep staff because they are being assaulted and now afraid. Nowhere in the Supreme Court ruling does it state that one group's well-being should take precedence over another person's safety. In fact, it is the complete opposite, that a site may be established if there is little or no evidence of negative impact on public safety. The evidence is already clear in Cambridge. Chief Brian Larkin stating in a 2018 Cambridge Times article, drugs is the driving force behind the increase in all types of crime happening in the region. Increased homicides and violent crime due to drug traffickers, increased break-and-enters and assaults due to users needing money to pay for their drugs. Mr. Larkin also stated at a recent Neighborhood Watch night that in the past, Central Division, specifically downtown Kitchener, had the majority of calls to service and that Galt was not a concern. Then in the late 90s, there was an uptick in calls to service to the Galt core. This uptick can be seen as a direct correlation to the added social services that have been established in the Galt core, specifically services for the drug user. In the last 10 to 20 years, the Galt core has seen a concentration of services such as the bridges, multiple free needle locations, methadone clinic, and much more. The Galt core went from very little police calls to a growing area of crime and violence. As stated earlier, the driving force of crime is due to drugs. As a council, I would lobby to have some of these services relocated so that they aren't all concentrated in our downtown Galt core. The growing crime has not gone unnoticed by the citizens of Cambridge. This is the reason why the vast majority of respondents in the Meridian survey stated that they did not want a CTS anywhere in Cambridge. A CTS would further intensify services, which would in turn further intensify crime and reduce public safety. The City of Oshawa, who has a much higher need than Cambridge, currently the 6th highest in drug overdoses, rejected a site due to crime. Listen to the residents of Cambridge who do not want more services that will increase crime. Follow the Supreme Court ruling that puts public safety first. Choose option 6 to prohibit a CTS anywhere in Cambridge, or at the very least, option 2 that would prohibit a CTS in downtown cores and the 500-meter buffer. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. To the committee, are there any questions? Seeing none, I thank you very much.
Thank you.
We had a delegation, Sherry Roy, who was unable to make it tonight, and she has asked that her remarks be read. They should be read by me, the chair, but I'm turning it over to our clerk because, if you may have noticed, I am getting over a cold, and the more I talk, the more I get tickles and the more I cough. So I'm asking Mr. Hudson if he would read Sherry Roy's comments for us.
Thank you, Chair Reid. And through the Chair, I'll now read Sherry Roy's comments. Good evening, Mayor, Councillors, staff, and the public. I am here today to address concerns regarding the CTS planning study and the recommendations for land use planning policies and zoning regulations by Meridian. From the report submitted by Meridian Planning Consultants, they recommend that Cambridge Council approve option 5, CTS permitted anywhere as a public use, which requires no official plan amendment and/or zoning bylaw amendment to establish a CTS. Public use zoning does not have sufficient restrictions to properly address the concerns of the community and respect the community members' overwhelming fears regarding public safety. These concerns are clearly identified in the report stemming from the comments on the possibilities for increased crimes, a site's close proximity to schools, daycares, seniors' facilities, and family residential areas. We as Canadians have the right to ensure we are safe. The report lends too much weight on the federal and provincial application processes that lack important restrictions residents are demanding. Lethbridge failed to address zoning laws to regulate a CTS location. They have admitted poor choice of its current location in their fragile downtown core and are currently in the process of requesting new reports that reflect the impact to smaller communities. Lethbridge has both the federal exemption and provincial funding, and as crime has increased significantly, so have the needs that now require more tax dollars to fund additional supports on already strained services. They are now considering moving or closing the site completely. The CTS application processes do not address independent agencies from bypassing the provincial funding process. If such funding was provided privately or locally, Council needs to seriously consider approving restricted zoning bylaws, as a request could result in a need to increase policing services at a time when we are unable to meet our current demands, as was disclosed by Chief Larkin. It is clearly stated that in the report that this matter is more than a municipal concern, as it involves planning and policies from all levels of government. And yet, here we are in discussions with only one level, our municipality. The report makes no mention of the need to include our elected provincial and federal representatives of our city. Council should not move forward with decisions until such time there can be a joint discussion and agreement with our local MPs and MPPs that are elected to represent our community on provincial and federal matters. We are failing as a community when reports reflect a limited scope. CTS only covers a small percentage of the population that are visible in their suffering from addictions. It does not address the larger population who are overdosing in their homes. Public health, with their main focus on one pillar, has failed to efficiently address the needs and safety of our community as a whole. After numerous consultations where the public has been clear with an overwhelming response of no to a CTS in Cambridge, we feel that our voices are not being heard. With a population of 135,000, 3 downtown cores, and surrounding smaller communities, the uniqueness of our city makes us different from other cities and puts us in a more fragile state. We ask that the City of Cambridge take precautions and improve the highest level of zoning to protect our communities. I respectfully request that you amend the OP and zoning bylaw and select option 6 of the planning study. Do not permit any CTS within the city limits of Cambridge. Sherry Roy.
And that completes our delegations for tonight. But before I call for the motion to be put on the floor, I'm going to call for a 10-minute recess. I'd like to recall our meeting. We've had the opportunity to hear all of our delegations, and so now I want to ask Councillor Wolf to put the motion on the floor. Please read it in all its entirety, Councillor Wolf.
Through you, Madam Chair, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Adshade. Consumption and Treatment Services Planning Study Options. That Report 20-024 CD Reconsumption and Treatment Services Planning Study Options be received, and that Council direct City staff to implement Consumption and Treatment Services CTS Planning Study Option Number 5, CTS Permit Anywhere as a Public Use, as described in Report Number 20-024 CD CTS Planning Study Options, and that Council acknowledges that there are federal and provincial programs in place for the Consumption and Treatment Services Site application process. And further, the Council acknowledges that they still have the opportunity to withhold a Council resolution of support for a CTS site application under the provincial program for a site they do not support. And speaking to the motion.
Please go ahead.
As we have heard from our delegates, permitting a CTS in Cambridge is a very controversial topic. One fact I keep in mind is that 14,000 Canadians have died of drug overdose since 2016, but not one person has died in a CTS site. They do save lives. Listening to concerns raised tonight, location is important, but that is not our decision tonight. Tonight we are dealing with the recommendations of the planning study conducted into the land use called Consumption and Treatment Services in Ontario, and to provide Council with options. Option 5, as has been said, gives Council the greatest control over where or if a CTS site is placed. Option 1 to 4 and 6 would need an official plan amendment, a temporary use zoning bylaw, and a temporary use zoning bylaw amendment. This means we would have to go to the region for approval. They could reject our recommendation or amend it. These options would also be subject to appeal at the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, again, taking a decision out of Council's hands. Option 5 recognizes that CTS are highly regulated by both the federal and provincial governments. Adding another level of regulation would be a duplicative and a confusing process. Finally, to receive provincial funding, Council must have community consultation and must approve the site, so we would have the final say. I believe option 5, no changes required, is our best option.
Thank you, Councillor Wolf. Now, Councillor Adshade.
Thanks, Chair Reid, and I support this motion. I think any CTS site would have to go through a rigorous application process established by the provincial and federal government. This option avoids a situation where another body, such as the region or LPAT, can become the decision maker regarding a potential CTS site upon appeal. This option leaves this Council with the power to approve or decline any potential future CTS site. Presently, I would not support a CTS site in the core, buffer zone, or residential area. I have consistently claimed and on the last election stated the hospital would be the best site for any potential CTS site, which should include substantial treatment services. Thank you.
And now we'll go to Councillor Ameta.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. This is a very hard issue, and I do appreciate the many viewpoints, and I think it's great that we're able to have a good civil discussion on this. It's a tough decision for me, it really is, because I am very passionate about people in our community, people from all backgrounds. You know, we all have struggles, so I care about everyone regardless of what they're struggling with, and we're all people, we're all human beings. And I certainly do want to save lives, and I'm a big supporter of treatment, I think we need to see a lot more in that, and I'm glad to see initiatives like the neighborhood table and some of the other groups in the community and the food bank, all they've done to help people, and how we have good policies in Cambridge to encourage the creation of affordable housing units, how we're a leader in that that topic. But you know, I still struggle with supporting an injection site. I did promise my constituents in the campaign I would oppose one. I heard in the ward that, you know, probably 90% of the people, pretty much at every door, almost said they did not want one in their community. So I won't be supporting it for that reason. And I do think that there are certain battles that are worth fighting. I mean, if we end up at the LPAT, you know, let's go out and get outside legal counsel. Let's get another lawyer, like for that, and see where that ends up. And if it's not going to go favorable for the city, we do have the option to negotiate. And I would rather wait until we're in that position to see, rather than you know, vote for it at this time. So I will be opposing the injection site. And it was mentioned this evening, which I didn't even know of, but the city of Oshawa did reject the injection site. I did go do a Google search to read some articles on the break. It was turned down in a 6-5 vote on around like March 2019, and it's been almost a year and they still don't have one. So I would like to put up a fight and not to have that in our community, but to be compassionate and to help people get the services they need. So I'm comfortable with taking the risk and opposing this. The residents have made it very clear, and the public feedback. And as I said, I heard it a lot at the door, so I'm opposing it. Thank you.
I have no further speakers. Does that mean we are ready? Nope, here we go. Councillor Mann.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I think, as everybody has said, this is a very difficult issue. Very difficult if we were voting for a site location, but we're not voting for a location tonight. We're voting on a process, and I think it's really important that the audience understands that we're voting in relation to a process that gives this council the right, and I think Mr. Adams said it, that we need to stand up for the citizens in our community, and I think this vote tonight will give us the unfettered responsibility and right to make a decision based on the information that's before us. And so I want to make it clear that I'm not voting on a site, because I don't feel that our community, any of our core areas, can support a CTS. And as Councillor Adshade has said, I believe the only place for a CTS is at CMH. That's my position, but we're not voting on that tonight. This planning study by Meridian was required as a result of the City of Cambridge imposing an interim control bylaw, and we implemented that interim control bylaw for the safety of our community. We didn't want a CTS in the core. That's what the interim control bylaw prevented. That was because we know that our core areas can't sustain a CTS. And we were very clear about that as a council, that we were opposed to it because we knew that the downtown cores could not sustain that. In fact, we said not in the core and not within 500 meters of the core. And I think that emphasized the significance and the importance to your council, from your council, that we did not want it in the core area. But now, as part of the application process, because we have implemented that control bylaw, this process has to take place, and it requires a robust consultation process is required, and requires local council resolution of support. So for me, this motion gives me the authority and the responsibility to represent you, my community, in making any decision. And I have really heard what's been said tonight. I've heard and seen what's been said in the report, and I think the community has spoken very loud and very clearly. If any option other than 5 is selected, decision-making is taken from council, and LPAT has that authority to approve or recommend. They may very well agree with us, but we're taking a chance, and I don't want to take that chance. I want to make sure that that responsibility stays with council, because I think that is our responsibility. Option 5 gives council the right and the responsibility to stand up for our community, for all the citizens of Cambridge. And it gives me, as I said, that unfettered right to decide based on the feedback from our community. Our core areas cannot support a CTS, and I don't support one in the core area, as I've said. We're not voting for the location, we're voting for a process. And I want to make sure that the power for the process and the power for any of the decision-making as far as a CTS stays with this council, where I really believe it belongs and should stay. I will be voting in favor of this motion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Now we'll move to Councillor Liggett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, tonight, and since we got this report, we keep hearing about the process, that's what this is all about. But at the same time, we're being told that, you know, there's a lot of fear-mongering, I think, going on about what LPAT is all about and what our rights are with LPAT, or what our rights are with the process. LPAT would never overturn council's decision as long as we followed the region's official policy plan, and we didn't do anything that was against the provincial policies. And I don't believe that we're doing any of that here. And even if, I mean, it's part of our judicial system. It's a tool to use. It's not something to be afraid of. I don't know why everybody's afraid of it, because if, let's say they decided that somebody appeals it and they rule that we've done something against the region's official policy plan, which we wouldn't be doing, but let's say they decided to do that. They still give us the option. They bring it back to us, and we have 90 days to reissue a new decision on what we're going to do about it. It's not over and done with at that point in time. There are different layers of an LPAT decision. And at the last decision being used in London, they didn't have the information that came out on January 13 to be used. I'm sure if the people appealed against the City of London's decision had that information, they would have utilized it. But they didn't have that. And we have that today. So it's a totally different world for us than just this month alone. So I'm not going to support that. I am going to stand by what I had originally campaigned on. It's my personal belief that we aren't doing any service to the people who use the CTS. We have got to force the other levels of government to do their jobs. Create the rehab beds, put the funding into that, put the funding into detox. We all know the wait lists are way too long. People are dying because of that, not because they don't have CTS. It's also known that we're still going to have the drug debris. People are still going to OD. And yes, it's true. Maybe that nobody has died in a site, but they die outside of the site once they have left it, which is still because of the use of that particular site. So that's a false argument, in my opinion. So I can't support this option. It doesn't deal with, putting in a CTS site doesn't also deal with the people that die in their homes. And these heat maps that we have, by the way, do not apply to any of that. Those are not shown. They're not part of those statistics of the heat maps.
Moving on, Mayor McGarry.
Thank you very much. And through you, Madam Chair, I also appreciated the heartfelt comments that we got from so many individuals here in our community. And I think, as I said earlier, it has been shown consistently that this is a council who has consistently made decisions in order to protect our fragile downtown cores and 500-meter buffer. And I hold to that. I think that option 5 allows council to make the decision. Your council has shown consistently, including the most recent motion this past summer, in order to direct staff of the Site Selection Committee that they are to now look for sites outside the downtown core and the 500-meter that was established during the interim control bylaw. For me, it makes it a made-in-Cambridge solution to have the City Council here to make any decision from a site selection committee that comes forward. The last thing I really want to say is that as your mayor, I have been continuously advocating at both the federal and provincial levels, as well as the regional level, to increase funding for detox beds, rehab beds, mental health and addictions, and increase police. And today, when I met with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, because he happened to be in town, I continued a conversation that I started with him last week. I've asked him to take back our messages again to the cabinet table at the provincial government in order to continue to advocate for increased services, not just in Cambridge and the region, but across Ontario to help fight the opioid crisis. So, Madam Chair, I just want to say that I commit continually to protecting our cores and the 500-meter buffer when we may discuss sites at a future date. And I will be voting in favor of option 5 to maintain control in this council. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move to Councillor Devine.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. I really appreciate the presentations that were done tonight. Very well done, very emotional. But I look at the report, and the opioid crisis has probably done more damage to the cores than the big box stores have, to be honest with you. The cores are hurting. We cannot have a CTS in the core. We cannot have a CTS in the buffer. We cannot have that. And I think everybody here in council agrees to that. But we've had a lot of discussion about this. And if you look at the report that Meridian did, if you look at the comments through the back, probably 80% of them, people are against the CTS. But on the other hand, maybe these are people that are more privileged and they have a computer and have a home where they can do their stuff. Maybe we didn't reach out to some of the people that are in need. But in saying that, I also believe there's only one place in this community where we can put a CTS. And that's either at the hospital or a building very close to the hospital. I believe that in my whole heart. So I'm going to vote against this motion. Until I hear it's going to be at the hospital, I have great difficulty with what's going on there. I mean, we know our community, we know the various areas of our community, and the only place we can do this, for me, is at the hospital. Thank you.
Moving forward, Councillor Mehta.
Chair, so I am very glad to hear that council is still supportive of keeping it out of the downtowns, which I never doubted for a minute. And I mean, like, let's face it, our downtowns are small, right? And it would completely be a catastrophe to the core. It would, you know, it would really, like, it'd be like leveling the place, you know, more damage since World War II kind of thing. So I'm talking the damage overseas. It'd be damaging like that. So I'm glad we're not going down that road, but I still am going to act on my convictions, and I'm still going to represent the people of my ward, and I'm going to oppose this motion. And I'm not scared of the LPAT. If it goes there, we've still got time to negotiate as part of the process. You know, we've got, as Councillor Liggett had mentioned, you've still got that 90-day period. I've seen it done in Oakville, where the city lost a battle with a high-rise, and they had a window of opportunity where they were able to negotiate with the developer and at least make it blend in with the community. So, you know, there are opportunities to negotiate at a later date, and I'm very comfortable doing that if we have to. But I'm going to be acting on my convictions and representing the residents of my ward, and I'm going to be opposing this. And I would like it to be a recorded vote just so they know that I took their views to City Hall here. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wolf.
Through you, Madam Chair. Again, I'll be supporting the motion. And just to remind people that to go to LPAC does cost a lot of money. And we are conscious of
taxpayers. We always hear that. And to put ourselves in a position where we would have to fight them isn't free. So voting for option 5 maintains the control, and we don't need to go that route. So again, I will be voting for option 5.
I see no further people, so does that mean that you are ready for the vote? It would appear so. So I will call for a polled vote.
Through the chair, council has requested a poll vote. Council members, you may vote now. The motion carries on a recorded vote 5-3.
Thank you very much. Continuing on, is there any notice of motions? Seeing none. Close of the meeting. We are now ready for the motion to close. Councillor Liggett, you have the motion. Please read it in its entirety. I can't get her up.
I do, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Devine, that the Planning and Development Committee meeting does now adjourn at 9:46.
All those in favor? Motion is carried. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.